Ever since the day that you went away,
Hi and Assalamualaikum, we are from Group 2. In this video, we would like to discuss on the topic given, which is the United Nations Human Rights Treaties and its implementation in Malaysia. The international law has developed and recognized minimum international standards on human rights. It is, however, important to consider how they actually affect the life of the human beings in question. So before that, let me bring you to understand the general view of human rights and its importance. If we're looking on the perspective of human rights are the fundamental rights and liberties that every person in the world belong to from birth to death. They are applicable regardless of where you are from, what you believe, or how you live your life. They can never be taken away, but they can be limited in certain circumstances, such as when a person violates the law or in the interest of national security. These fundamental rights are founded on common values such as dignity, fairness, equality, respect, and independence. These values are legally defined and protected. Other than that, how can human rights help you and why it is important? Human rights concern all of us, not just those subjected to repression or mistreatment. They safeguard you in many aspects of your daily life, including your freedom to hold and express your own views, your educational rights, your right to privacy and family life, and your right not to be mistreated or wrongfully punished by the state. So there are an important form protection for all of us, especially those who may be subjected to abuse, neglect, or isolation. Most importantly, this right empower us and allow us to speak up and challenge poor treatment by a public authority.
Hi, in my part, I will explain a little bit about the 7 core of the UN Human Rights Treaty in Malaysia, which is consists of CEDAW, CRC, and CRPD, that become 3 ratified treaty in Malaysia, which subject to the Malaysia criticism that the country is only willing to ratify international human rights treaty on issues that are deemed as source issue. So for these 3 treaties that has been ratified and implemented in Malaysia, my friend will explain a little bit deeper from me. As for the remaining, which is 5 core of the UN Human Rights Treaty that has not been ratified and implemented in Malaysia, which is consist of International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, ICED, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, ICESCR, Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, CAT, International Convention on Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Family, which is ICMRW. In this question, why do Malaysia not ratify those 5 core of the UN Human Rights Treaty rather than 3 treaties that have been stated earlier? Firstly, this is because Malaysia is multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural, and multilingual, and Malaysia is also a democracy, a state that must be consider all the religions, all the races together before implement any treaties. However, in practice, Malaysia government have often said that it's not ready and still in consultation and ensuring its preparedness with the reference to signing and ratify the 5 remaining 5 core of the UN Human Rights Treaty, and also it required the government to legislate the international human rights instrument into domestic legislation before Parliament. Only upon gaining a majority view can be the international instrument be transformed into local legislation.
Malaysia has ratified few international human rights treaties. One of them is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. Generally, it was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1979. The treaty consists of 30 articles, which empowers and focuses on the equality between women and men by giving the same and equal access and opportunities in every aspect in life, such as politics, education, health, and employment. All states that have ratified this treaty are legally bound to put its provision into practice. Malaysia ratified CEDAW in 1995. As aforementioned, Malaysia also needs to take appropriate measures in order to protect women from any form of discrimination and for them to enjoy their human rights and fundamental freedoms. It can be said that women's rights in Malaysia have progressed in a few areas, regressed in others, and stagnated in many. The government decided to amend Article 8 Clause 2 of the Constitution by including gender as a basis for non-discrimination. These two steps taken by Malaysia were said to be its approaches to protect women's rights as a whole. However, the reality is that women still be facing discrimination in private and government sectors. It was said that the government has not incorporated the CEDAW Convention into national law as there is no gender equality legislation in place providing for the comprehensive realization of equality of both women and men in public and private spheres. The term discriminations in the federal constitution has been left out to the courts and the government to interpret. For instance, in the case of Asia Berhad and Nur'afifah Bt Muhammad Aris, the court found that there had not been discriminations against a trainee who was terminated due to her pregnancy, and moreover, that CEDAW does not have the binding force of law in Malaysia as it has not been incorporated into domestic law. This somehow proves that the protection of women in Malaysia is not comprehensive. Therefore, the government will need to review the whole thing in order to protect women's rights in Malaysia.
Convention on the Rights of the Child 1989 or CRC 1989 is a byproduct of the national regime that is founded by several early international child rights instruments like the Geneva Declaration on the Rights of the Child 1924, the Universal Declaration on the Human Rights 1948, Declaration on the Rights of the Child 1959, and so on. CRC 1989 was adopted during the 44th session of the International General Assembly on 20 November 1989 and open for ratification by each member state ever since. Until today, there are 196 states that already ratified the CRC 1989, including Malaysia, which had done so on 17 February 1995. To fulfill its obligation under CRC 1989, Malaysia has enacted a piece of law known as Child Act 2001, specifically designed to protect children in Malaysia that entered into force on 2002. Besides this act, Malaysia also has enacted several laws that functioning to protect the child from being affected by the adults negatively. However, the main law that is supposedly functioning to protect child in Malaysia, like Malaysia Child Act 2001, is facing some drawbacks. This is because during the course of its implementation, there are some government officers who doesn't know about it. There are some government officers who think that parents have more right over the child on the law than otherwise. And there are also child cases in Malaysia which are more likely to be treated under other law like Penal Code of Malaysia than being put under specifically designed Child Act 2001. This made the child before Malaysian law doesn't possess any special position and only be treated as an ordinary person that may be affected negatively by other people. Hence, Malaysia failed to fulfill its obligation in protecting the child as being highlighted under CRC 1989.
So next is the UN Convention of the Right of Persons with Disabilities or UNCRPD. So Malaysia became a signatory of the UNCRPD in 2008 and later ratified it in 2010. So the purpose of the UNCRPD is mentioned in Article 1, in which the state has to promote, protect and ensure the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedom by all persons with disabilities, and also to promote respect for their inherent dignity. However, Malaysia has made some reservation on the two main articles of the CRPD, namely Article 15 regarding the freedom of torture or cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, and also Article 18 regarding liberty of movement and nationality. So Malaysia did not sign also the optional protocol of the UNCRPD, where the signing of the optional protocol would allow any individuals or group to make complaints on any breach occur against the person with disability to the committee of the UNCRPD. So this means that the Malaysian government does not fully subscribe to the fundamental principles that person with disability should enjoy, such as non-discriminatory, freedom, and also liberty. So, moreover, there are many issues arises where one of them is regarding the lack of understanding about the culture of the people with disabilities, where often cause them to be marginalized in their employment market. For example, in Malaysia, the number of people with disabilities which are employed in this private sector is very small, and this shown that our society has less confidence of the disabled person. However, I think this issue is important to take into account because they also have the right to work to support themselves.
Effectiveness of the implementation of the mentioned treaties are no doubt because they have changed the life of people with disabilities, employers in the working place, and also children. These treaties have influenced various stakeholders, including state parties, non-governmental organizations, many activists, academicians, and individuals who are willingly working and cooperate together to uphold the rights and dignity of the world's largest minority. Malaysia has inherently shown worthy and long-term commitment by the government to ensure the protection of people in accordance with international human rights standards. The details of these treaties and their specific application in domestic settings need to be undertaken through the process of negotiation between the society and state. The ability of a state to effectively discharge its responsibilities in the area of human rights depends predominantly on the strength of its domestic institutions and its perspective on human rights. Next, the challenges on the approach to human rights, which is the Malaysian government has also argued that international standards of certain human rights are not applicable to Malaysia because of two main factors. Firstly, there is an overemphasis on the right of the individual as opposed to the rights of the community. Excessive individual freedom, according to the Malaysian government, can lead to a decay in moral values and weakens the nations, leading to the rise of new forms of racism and xenophobia, which is manifested in violence. Secondly, international standards of human rights, for example, the UDHR, also give greater priority to civil and political human rights than economic rights, and are thus alien to Malaysian traditions and cultures. Individual rights and freedoms of the people in Malaysia will be protected or violated because of what exists or what is lacking within the state, and not because of what is said or done within international law and international institutions.
Previously, we have emphasized the importance of human rights to protect us against any form of discrimination. And so then, the United Nations has concluded at least 8 core treaties on human rights covering all important areas in our life include ICERT, ICCPR, ICESCR, CAT, ICMRW, which Malaysia is yet to ratify, and CEDAW, CRC, as well as CRPD, which has been ratified and practiced in Malaysia. Despite not ratifying the other treaties, it can be said that Malaysia has been doing a fair job in some areas for the sake of its due diligence, but still lacks on the other parts. For example, as a Muslim majority country, Malaysia has been hosting refugees from Rohingya, which is good, but by not legally recognize them, might actually reflect a bad implementation of human rights in Malaysia. Furthermore, a study showed that the reason Malaysia rejects from applying all types of treaties is because the government's perspective of universal human rights as a Western concept and the adoption of Asian values in international standards of human rights, for example, the UDHR, it also gives greater priority to civil and political human rights. That's why it's alien to Malaysian tradition and cultures. And for that reason, we believe that there are actually a lot of things that need to be improved in Malaysia because we should not jeopardize human rights just for the sake of upholding our values. Therefore, the government should examine this matter more closely to balance out the situation so that nothing was left behind, be it human rights or our values. In addition to that, we are actually benefiting from the entrance of migrant workers in our country, but they receive little to non-protection from our government against any unfair treatment to them by irresponsible employers, for example. So we suggest for the Malaysian government to work on this and thus to perhaps ratify the International Convention on Protection of the Rights of all migrant workers and members of their families, or ICMRW. That's all from us. Thank you for listening.
Ever since the day that you went away.